I saw Michael standing there. Diddy was laughing, and the baby was begging for it to stop.
I can't stay silent any longer. I saw what my father did. I saw Diddy. I saw those tapes, and I've kept it inside for far too long. That was the first sentence Janet Jackson uttered when she stood before the federal court this morning. Her voice low, her eyes red. The entire courtroom fell into a stunned silence that lasted 18 seconds. After that opening statement, no one expected Michael Jackson's younger sister, a woman who had never publicly opposed her family, to become the key witness in what is now being called the most damning cultural reckoning in Hollywood history. But Janet did what no one else dared to do. She overturned the legacy of the Jackson family, dragged Diddy back into the abyss, and publicly exposed what had been hidden beneath the floors of million-dollar parties, where the stage lights were merely a mask for corruption. Part 1, Courtroom 7, when silence was executed at 8:41 a.m. on the 31st day of the Sean Combs, also known as Diddy, trial at the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Manhattan. The session began as if repeating a familiar script, lawyers quietly organizing documents. The prosecution is checking slides, the media team charging live broadcast equipment. But then, the rear door to Courtroom 7 slowly opened. A woman stepped in. Her head was wrapped in a black silk scarf, unannounced, no bodyguards. Everyone rose, not out of protocol, but shock. Janet Jackson, Michael Jackson's sister, she sat in the wooden seat in the front left row, usually reserved for witnesses. She looked at no one. Her hands were tightly folded in her lap, as if they were trembling uncontrollably. People assumed she was there to observe. But 11 minutes later, a federal assistant walked in, placed a file before the judge, and whispered something that made him nod immediately. The jurors were asked to leave the room. The press was ordered to turn off their cameras. Then the judge said something unprecedented in the past 30 days of trial. The next testimony is approved for public record. Voluntary witness. No anonymity. Sworn testimony. Janet stood, her legs wobbled, but her voice rang clearly, each word like a hammer striking the courtroom table. I am here to tell the truth. Not to defend anyone. Not to defend my family. And not to withhold anything anymore. Hundreds of heads turned toward Diddy, who sat expressionless. The first revelations took everyone's breath away. Janet described the parties at Neverland, where Michael Jackson lived and hosted private gatherings regularly attended by Diddy. According to her, attendees were not just artists, but also models, athletes, and occasionally politicians. Young girls, Janet said, some under 18, were brought in by limo, separated, and asked to sign consent to be filmed forms. But what shocked the courtroom was not the filming, it was its purpose. Those tapes weren't for entertainment. They were kept, edited, and used for coercion. Janet admitted she initially didn't know. But after wandering into a control room beneath the main house, she saw hard drives labeled JJ07 NE12DW7. I never dared open them until Diddy was under investigation. I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. The tapes Janet submitted to prosecutors totaled 48 hours of footage spanning over 6 years, featuring no fewer than 31 famous individuals. Janet began to cry as she recounted the moment she saw Michael Jackson emerge from the dark room, where the tapes were still recording, and whispered to Diddy, "That one didn't cry today," but his face was as white as paper. She never forgot. That sentence, I didn't dare ask, but I couldn't forget. A court examiner confirmed that Janet submitted materials not only matched existing FBI investigative data, they also provided new clues regarding storage locations and transaction accounts related to the overseas distribution of the tapes. The courtroom was ice cold, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the changed gazes. Many former Michael Jackson fans couldn't believe what they heard. A middle-aged man, a music researcher, sat behind the press bench, head down on the desk, tears streaming. A Variety reporter trembled and left mid-session, but Janet continued. She described an incident from 2005, when Diddy and Michael invited a group of directors and investors to tour the house. That night, a girl was assaulted after being drugged. Janet said, I don't remember her name, but I remember her face. And now I'm asking the court to help find those individuals. They are victims, and I was a bystander. One of the tapes shown in a sealed courtroom, according to media reports, depicted a 4-hour party with 17 attendees, including 2 deceased celebrities and at least 5 still active in the entertainment industry. The prosecutor didn't read names, but Janet said, I remember everyone, every expression. When Diddy's lawyer tried to interrupt with a question, can you confirm there was no consent from the people in the clip? Janet simply replied, I can confirm no one volunteered to be filmed when they were drunk and unaware. At 10:09 a.m., Janet concluded her testimony with the words, "I had no choice but to speak because I had been forced into silence for too long. But today, I reclaim my voice. For myself and for those who cannot speak." The courtroom remained silent. No one dared applaud. No one dared speak. But one thing became clearer than ever. Michael Jackson's legacy, no longer defined by his music, had become a series of unanswered, haunting questions. Part 2. The Lost Tapes. 14 Codes. 14 Victims. Late that night, just hours after Janet Jackson's shocking testimony, the New York FBI headquarters remained brightly lit. A list of 14 video files sat on a desk, each labeled with a short cryptic code. No names, no timing scrolls, only combinations. Like JJ07, NE12, MC19 stamped at the top in bold. Classified. Each of these seemingly meaningless codes represented a person, a victim, a face caught in an impaired state, coerced, turned into a pawn in the sick game Diddy and his accomplices had orchestrated for over a decade. Digital Storage Room 3, typically used for federal cases involving human trafficking and child exploitation, was temporarily repurposed exclusively for the Diddy case. A team of technicians flown in from Quantico was tasked with recovering and decrypting the hard drives Janet Jackson had submitted. These drives were multi-layer encrypted, using professional-grade tools not easily available on the market, and when opened, the files were not labeled by name, but instead bore fragmented, disturbing phrases: darkness, Vegas silence, 427 eyes open, unconscious. What shocked the entire digital investigation team into silence was the uncanny match between Janet's sworn testimony and the data found in the first 14 decoded tapes. 12 of the videos showed the same room, white-walled, draped in black velvet curtains, dimly lit, with a single fixed-angled camera. The victims were often in an impaired state, sometimes tied up, sometimes held in vulnerable positions. Though no one spoke directly, Diddy's voice, hoarse, low, occasionally laughing, rang out in nearly 80% of the footage. An anonymous federal investigator told the press, "I've handled many trafficking cases, but I've never seen a filming and storage system this sophisticated. It's not just perverse, it operated like a professional organization." Why were these tapes stored so carefully? For what purpose? The FBI hypothesizes they weren't simply for sexual gratification, but for control. Those recorded were mostly celebrities, influencers, or industry insiders. If leaked, their reputations would be utterly destroyed. Conversely, the holder of the tape wielded the power to manipulate their careers, reputations, even finances. One 80-minute tape labeled Road 14 depicted an Asian woman under 20, naked, continuously instructed to perform specific acts through a speaker hidden in the ceiling. At minute 11, she screamed, "I don't want to. I don't know who he is," but no one intervened. The camera kept rolling, and at the bottom of the video, according to metadata, was a directive, use as tool, deal later. This led investigators to suspect a network, trading, or sponsoring tapes with third parties. At trial, Diddy's defense lawyers repeatedly requested that the tapes remain sealed to protect unnamed individuals. But prosecutors rejected the plea, stating, "The tapes are direct evidence of organized crime, and those depicted have the right to know how and when they were filmed and abused." Among the 14 identified victims, 3 were internationally recognized models. 2 had appeared in music videos by Diddy and Jay-Z. One was an emerging singer at the time of recording. An emergency meeting was convened in room 24B at the FBI's New York office with representatives from the Financial Crimes Unit, Immigration Services, and even Interpol. The reason? 6 of the victims were not U.S. citizens and showed signs of being lured into the country under performance visas. "This is no longer an entertainment scandal," one agent said. "It's evidence of a high-level trafficking ring using the music industry as a cover to legitimize heinous crimes." The big question remains, who filmed these tapes? Who operated the encryption and the storage system? And if Diddy didn't act alone, then who else was involved? A final revelation came when the FBI released metadata from one of the drives. It had synced with the device in Malibu, California.